It's that time again. If you're a real estate agent and you're looking to finally build a business that creates consistent cash flow, but you're concerned about all of the market disruptions, relax. You found your safe haven to learn the secret to success. List, you last. Welcome to this week's podcast. Hey, welcome fellow listing agents. Bob Mangold, the listing coach here with episode number 46 of the If You List, You Last podcast. Can you believe it? Coming up on almost a year now that we've been doing this. As always, thanks for listening, sharing, and downloading. Today, we're going to talk about how adding simple phrases to your listings can cost your homeowners up to 8.5% of their equity, and what you can do to avoid that. So grab a cup of coffee and settle in. Now, this won't be a particularly long podcast today. There's not that much that I've got to say about it, other than it's critical that you do understand this information. Just a reminder, make sure you join our Real Estate Asset Advisor Facebook group so you can join in on the conversation, share your thoughts, comments, or maybe you have questions on any of the topics that I discuss right here on the podcast. Let's do a quick mortgage market update this week, because there's not a lot of news to give you. The markets pretty much are trending and trading in a very horizontal fashion, very close to the 25-day moving average up and down, which means you got your interest rates between 6 and maybe 6.25%. FHA rates can be down to 5.25%, right in that range. So the good news is that's trending. We're waiting for job numbers to come out this week. Again, job numbers can have an impact on the market, even though they're complete BS. And again, we've talked about that before, but we'll see what happens. But again, I don't see any major spikes up or down in the market for right now. And then we'll see what happens 2 days after the election, or I believe it's maybe a day after the election, where the Fed meets again, whether they cut 25 or 50 basis points. That will have an impact and that will help. But again, I will tell you, my anticipation by the end of the year, you're going to see rates under 6% in that 5.75% to 6% range. Nothing's changed my thoughts on that. The amount of activity in the bond sales, the mortgage-backed securities bonds, the 10-year bond, things of that nature, all pretty much staying the same. I think we'll see a slower creep go on. And then, quite honestly, guys, there's a lot of factors going on right now. We just had the hurricane in Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, and thoughts and prayers out to anybody listening to this in those markets. You have the longshoremen that are on strike. You now have a war, a three-pronged war in the Middle East, the elections. So there's a lot of stuff going on that could have a big impact on both the mortgage market and, quite honestly, folks, the real estate market. As you think about this longshoreman strike, guess what, guys? If we can't get steel and we can't get supplies and equipment and things like that, it's going to impact the construction in the new home market. It's going to have a big impact, right? So the best I can tell you, fasten your seatbelt. We're going for a ride. There's a lot of stuff going on, but nothing's really changed my opinion based on tracking mortgage-backed security and 10-year bond charts. I still am going to stick with that prediction, 5.75% to 6% by the end of the year. Okay, so let's get started and just talk about what not to do in your listings. Now, where I got this information from, folks, was actually Realtor.com. They did a study on how phrases that you use in your description of a property could actually impact the price as much as 8.5%, or just under $38,000 off a median priced home. So you simply making a mistake, like using the word price to sell, motivated seller, any of those kinds of things can have a huge impact. Now, the crazy thing is the discount ranges, or the difference in price to sell when using that language, can be as high as 23.1% in Little Rock, Arkansas, to just 3.2% in Orlando, Florida. But across the 38 markets, there's a statistically meaningful discount. The average is 8.5%. Now, the share of listings with price to sell in the description, or really any words along that line, ranges from 1.9% on Long Island to 6.7% in Sarasota, Florida. And then metros with a higher share of price to sell homes on the market tend to have smaller discounts compared with metros with a lower share. right? And really, what that means is that the sellers needed to offer some kind of discount when they really needed to sell the house, right? So, one of the worst things you can do, in my opinion, as an agent, even if they need to sell the house, is to use that kind of language, right? Divorce forces sale, motivated seller, bring me an offer now. Any of those things are going to impact your client by an average of 8.5%. So here's one of the things that I recommend. Knowing that, A, don't do it. B, how do you use that to your advantage? I'm going to share in the description of the podcast the article that I got this from so that you could keep it and make it part of your listing presentation. And then what I'm going to recommend to you is that you take, before you go on a listing presentation, or you could just take and do it almost at any time, go and search your MLS for listings that have those kind of words in it, right? Price to sell, motivated seller, divorce forces listings, etc. And you could have that available to share with people. Hey, one of the things, folks, we're going to make sure that we never do is use this kind of language. And let me give you an idea why this is so important, right? It equals an 8.5% discount. But to give you an idea, this is what the consumer never sees. And so you could show them the MLS listings with the language in there, showing the price to sell and do that. And the question that I always have asked a seller for this, because I've talked about this for literally for decades in a listing presentation, is do you think the sellers really know that language is in that MLS listing? And if they did and they understood it could impact 8.5%, or on the median price home, $38,000 less in equity, do you think they'd approve of you putting that language in there? And so these are conversations that I recommend having with sellers because, well, what does that do for you? It makes you appear as, because you are the expert in real estate. You spend time researching this kind of data. You spend time listening to podcasts like this so that you can be on top of the market. That's what being an expert is all about, right? And so when you can back up this documentation with the sources in which you get that, and then also show examples where people are not, or agents are not respecting that discount, that's a big deal, folks. And so in this article, this is a great thing to show them. Again, they're using geographic, south, southwest, etc. But to give you an example, like in Little Rock, Arkansas, with that price to sell in their listing description, what that means is a $57,494 discount in Little Rock, $49,000 in St. Louis, $79,000 in Charleston. So when you understand what you're doing, that if you've listened to anything that I've ever taught in terms of classes, you'll always hear me say the words we use matter. This happens to be the words that we use in a listing matter. And so stop using price to sell and stop doing all those things. And that's why the home boss process of what we do to list properties is so powerful. We use price to drive traffic. And so consequently, we don't use that kind of language. We're creating a more of a buyer frenzy than creating like a buyer frenzy with people looking to steal a property, right? But understanding what you're doing to cost your consumer equity. And again, guys, we live in this litigious world. Let's say, for example, that you didn't talk to the seller about putting motivated seller or price to seller, whatever it was in your listing agreement, and the seller found that out. What if they go get a lawyer? Those are just things you shouldn't do as a matter of principle in business, but it's also to protect yourself on top of it. Now, here's the thing, guys. If you experience fewer price to sell properties in your market, let's say you go into your MLS and you look and, hey, there's not that many. You go, oh, not a big deal. Here's what we can tell you. When there are less properties that say price to sell, expect larger discounts in the list to sell ratio. Why does it work that way? I don't necessarily have a great explanation, but what I can tell you is it's what the data shows that Realtor.com pulled from all of this data. And so just understand that. We're in a different market than we were in certainly 2 years ago, even a year ago. And I will tell you, it's different than even 3 or 4 months ago. I think there's so much waiting, so many people waiting on the results of this election. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Nobody knows how this is all going to shake out. Now you start adding all these other things in, and wars and strikes and everything else. I just think the consumer's afraid right now. And so we have to understand we've got to be patient with these things and price your listing to sell, as we talked about last week, but then use the right listing, the right language, right? Again, if you're in a market that you have the largest share of price to sell listings, again, I'll put the link in there so that you can see this, but we'll consider a buyer in Phoenix, right? They have a lot of newer, recently built homes. A property that is in less than average condition, they say may need to be priced lower, folks. I will tell you, it does need to be priced lower. Because with all else being equal, in order for that buyer to consider buying the property, because there are a lot of other average or above average quality homes on the market. That's all it is. We talked a little bit about that on last week's podcast. Price your home to sell. It's a different market. And if it's not in great condition, guys, you're not getting full market value like you were in 2020 and 2021. It's not that kind of market anymore. So you need to take and be aware of what's going on in your market, right? I talked about doing a zip code analysis where you actually break down by zip code in your market. What's going on? What's the average length of time? What's the median sale price? What's the average time on market? What's the list to sell ratio? Like, you need to have that prepared when you go and talk to people about listings so that you can help them make a better decision on pricing the home. But above all else, don't think that you're going to help them out by saying, hey, price to sell. Why don't you just price the house to sell and not say it? Does that make sense? Hope told you this didn't have to be a particularly long podcast, because on some level, I think that there's some common sense in there that just allows you to do that, right? To make sure that we do business in the right way. And just use your head in today's economic environment. Like, you got to be the master of data of what's really going on in your market so that you can become the resource for your sellers to be able to hire the best professional to get the max amount of equity that they can get, even in this environment. Make sense? So I hope that helps, and we'll talk to you next week. And remember, if you list, you last. Talk to you next week.